Welcome to Thrive and Shine HR, a podcast and video series dedicated to helping us overcome the limiting beliefs, self-doubt, and imposter syndrome that so many of us HR professionals face. Here are your hosts with over 45 years experience in HR and certified life coaches, Jen and Katherine.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 43 of the Thrive and Shine HR podcast. We're so happy that so many of you are joining us live today. Jen, so good to see you. What is happening on the West Coast?
It's a little early here on the West Coast on a Sunday morning, but so good to be here. It's a wild. This is our last podcast episode before the end of 2024, right? And what a timely and amazing topic it just so happened to be. So I'm excited for today.
Yeah, absolutely. We're talking about reflection is the new gratitude practice. And it's so funny. I was presenting at an employment law conference, and I asked the audience there were 80 people in this audience. And I asked the audience how many people had a reflection practice. Maybe 3 hands went up. So I was very surprised by that because did I say reflection? Gratitude. 3 people had a gratitude practice. And that really surprised me because I talk about the importance of gratitude all the time. Jen, do you feel like you surround yourself with people who have a pretty strong gratitude practice, or was that number a little surprising for you too?
It's a surprising number. Yeah. But I think, for a lot of people, it feels like that's not something that is, super common practice. So I don't find that that's super unusual either to see, a lot of people who don't really have anything. I mean, they'll meditate here and there and they'll do something here and there, but in terms of something specifically that they have that is a more structured practice, it's not as common. So hopefully we'll change that today.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, if people don't really have a gratitude practice, I can't believe too many people have a reflection practice. So I love where you're going with this. How can we do our part to encourage people to have a reflection practice? Because it's really, really vital. I was listening to Mel Robbins' podcast last night, driving down from the craziness of Aspen, Colorado right now, which is just going bonkers, down to my mountain retreat here in Marble. And Mel was saying, and I thought this really made sense because she was talking about how in the world are you supposed to know where you're going in 2025 if you're not really honest with where you are right now? And to understand where you are right now, it requires reflection. And I went to a holiday party at a friend's house who I hadn't been to in about 5 years. And I was on a group text, and thank God another person on the text said, "Hey, could I have your address? Could I have your address?" And I just find that so interesting, and it's so telling that if somebody calls and says, "Hey, I'm lost," the first question we ask is, "Well, where are you?" You can't give directions unless you know where you are. So I found that to be really poignant, really timely. You can't make this stuff up. But of course it makes sense because it's the end of the year and everyone's talking about, okay, next year. But before we dive into 2025, we've got to do some reflecting. So Jen, I'm curious when you first discovered the power of a reflection practice, and what did your practice look like? What was the frequency? What results did it yield? Tell us everything about when you first discovered that power of reflecting.
Good question. So for those who might be new to the podcast or have not been here a whole lot, both Katherine and I have a ton of HR experience before becoming life coaches. And Kathy, you became a life coach in what year? It was 2020 as well, or 2021?
I think I became certified 4 years ago. I think.
Okay, okay. So same, right? So my certification was the very end of 2020, early 2021.
Mhm.
And, at the time I was working in a high level HR position. COVID happens, shut down. I'm home. I no longer have my 45-minute one-way commute. And I really felt inspired to be able to learn something new that I could really put into practice as an HR professional. And that's what really led me to get certified as a coach. And that certification was the beginning of a change of everything in my life, personally and professionally, to
Yeah.
learn skills that were really going to help me understand myself, which transformed the way I was able to show up for others and show up in the world. And reflection was a big, big part of that, because one of the cornerstones of coaching is really about knowing ourselves and having an understanding of what it is we are bringing to that table, and being able to compartmentalize, what we might be holding on to, what our attachments might be, anything like that. And so reflection is was such a powerful way through, the certification process to start understanding that, because that's not anything that I ever really had been taught ever, right? And so all of a sudden there was like all of these foreign things. Not only was I trying to learn the skills to be a decent coach, but even bigger than that, I was learning skills to like be a better person, be a better human by understanding myself, to be able to look back and recognize with full transparency, with full understanding of what I truly had brought in terms of how I might have shown up, and how I'm ultimately really the creator of it all. And so, that was really such, and I'm going to use the word again, but it was so transformative for me, because it really helped me realize how important it was for me to be able to reflect back on my own, on my own holdups and hangups and everything else, to be able to start letting go, releasing and shedding. And that, really has kind of led the way over the course of the last few years to now recognize, over and over again, how powerful it is whenever I'm going to go into any sort of meeting or conversation or presentation or anything that could be triggered, that could get, kind of emotional in some way. That reflection process is really the best way to be able to say, okay, how was this working for you in the past? What would you want to change about how this could work for you in the future? And those are the two questions, and we'll get into that later, but the two questions that I pretty much always ask myself at the end of a reflection practice, right? Is like recognizing the takeaways of, how did that work for you? And then what would you want to change going forward? So,
Mm.
okay, well, that was a lot of information, but I'm going to kind of turn on you. So I'd love to hear from you. What has your reflection practice, where it started and how it's transformed over time, and how you really put it into practice?
Yeah, I mean I love what you shared because of course, having gone through coaching school as well, they really do hammer home. I shouldn't say they so universally. My coaching program, I went through Health Coach Institute, and they too, I know we went to different coaching schools, they too really encourage the practice of reflection, although they didn't overtly call it that. It was really just embedded to that 6-month intensive. I don't even remember how many hours was involved, but you really do learn the art and the science of not only self coaching and a reflective practice for you, but you also help it also you learn the skill of helping others reflect, but not in a judgmental way. It's a curious way. And that's very, very different than how I think a lot of reflection tied to performance reviews tend to be. I think that's why I know I'm sort of going off in a different angle, but as you were talking, I'm thinking about, okay, I learned about reflection really, as a child very early on when you are given a grade and you look back, and if it's anything less than an A, it's not good enough. At least in my case, like anything less than an A was never good enough. So I think I started learning, the practice of reflection. It was sort of embedded for me very early on. And then my first HR job, I was 21 years old, spent 7 years with a company where we never really looked back. We never looked back at what was working, at least in HR. Maybe business development had certain metrics, but we never did that in HR. And then when I joined a design and planning firm, I was there for 12 years, ended up taking them global. We had very systematic reflection practices, and it really helped the business. And, this is a long time ago. This is the early 2000s that we actually did away with the archaic the annual performance management process because it didn't work. So we were sort of on the forefront of doing that. And it was based on a lot of research that I had been doing on the influence of fear and reflection in performance management. So that was sort of when I first discovered it. It was quite a long time ago. And my personal practice really reflected what we did in business. It was a very simple, what's working, what's not working, what am I going to do differently? And I brought that into my personal life during coaching school. Just every single night I would ask myself, okay, what's working, what went well today, whether it was personal or professional, what didn't. So what are you going to do differently tomorrow? What are you going to show up? How are you going to show up a little bit differently tomorrow? And not in this judgmental way. I truly developed the skill of looking back through curiosity. And that was a big change for me versus beating myself up. Oh my God, you didn't get the A. It's like, well, why didn't you get the A? And what needs to change next time so that you're excelling? Not about perfection, but you're excelling and you're moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a little bit different of an answer for sure. And I also went off in a tangent because I think that's what happens on Sunday mornings with lots of coffee.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's,
Jen,
it's great to kind of, oh, sorry. I think it's great to be able to hear those different perspectives for anybody out there who is kind of looking at what this could look like for them. Great to see the different options, right?
Totally. And I think the other thing is it's not a hard one size fits all and you develop a practice and it's the same throughout your life. It's just like everything else in life. We evolve, we change, our goals for the next year change. It's the same thing when it comes to reflection. So I'm curious, it sort of leads nicely into the next question of how has your reflection practice changed over the years? And does it vary from work and personal?
It doesn't really vary a whole lot from work and personal. I would say that it did previously because, like you were talking about being at this firm, we did this, so this is what we did. And at this firm,
Totally.
this is what we did, right? And so, over time, I think I incorporated whatever it was that was the going to do, wherever it was I was working. But once I've really learned some of the skills that I've learned and started practicing them.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm someone who, over the course of last year, you and I both, in terms of, drinking and recovery and that sort of thing, I'm a real active member now of Alcoholics Anonymous. And one of the things that we say every single meeting is keep coming back. It works if you work it. And for me, when it comes to like that one saying, right, it's all about like practice. And I was listening yesterday to a podcast, the Huberman Lab,
Yes.
and he was talking about the power of our beliefs. And that, what we believe is just a thought that we think over repeatedly, right? We've talked about that before.
I love it.
Power of that when it comes to, so much of, what we're trying to, be and who we're trying to be, that power of our beliefs, the sneaky part of what we might not even be consciously fully aware of is so important. And that's really truly what I've noticed with the power of reflection is, the more that I do it, the more that I just force myself, right? So after any time I've had any sort of emotional situation, right? Like if there's been some sort of emotional activity or, I had something trigger me, my go-to is always to sit down and just write out, even if it's like 5 sentences, a little download. I call it the thought download, right?
Yeah.
And it's really about like what is going on to
Yeah.
understand like what really is happening within me. Am I starting to doubt myself? Am I starting to doubt my capabilities? Am I questioning? Right? Those are the important things to get out, because in a reflective practice, so often beyond just, okay, it's done, it's over, what were some of the remnant thoughts and beliefs that might be sneaking in, that through that power of the reflective process, you can start
Mm,
to snuff out? And so the idea of, keep coming back, it works if you work it, is like, just do it anyway. Even if you feel like it wasn't something that necessarily over flooded with emotions and, you felt like it went reasonably well. If there's anything at all that you're not giving it an A, like you said with the report card, if it's not an A, just do it. Just do it.
let's
Just
do
go
it.
back into it, because there's something sneaky, I think, that's under the surface. And so it's that power of the practice. It's the power of the repetition. And then it just starts to get better and better. The other thing I'll say about it too is, I was just talking with my sister about this. One of the things that, I'm so grateful for, this year is, relationships that I really feel like are starting to get stronger and better and closer.
Mm,
And so much of that too has been the power of being able to reflect and own and be able to talk to it. And so, we were talking just yesterday about, how wild it can be when, we sometimes will start to get into, a belief system that can take us on a path for weeks, months, years, right? That may not be fully founded in the truth, because of something that we latched onto. And again, the ability of being able to slow ourselves down, reflect back, and think, back on, what really did we, what was the desired outcome, for, this particular issue, has been such a huge game changer. So I think I
mm,
went all over the place on that, but I just really, really, truly have found that the more that I have done it, and the more that I have not, slacked off. And that was the other thing that came up with my sister that I forgot about, is like, oh my gosh, if you're not doing it regularly, just like riding a bike, just like anything, if you're not practiced, you do get a little rusty. So this is, one of those things that I do recommend doing often enough to where you never have that rust build up.
mm. I love that. I love that.
What
Yeah.
about you?
Well, as you were talking, I was thinking about so many of my clients who are stuck in this go, go, go cycle. Keep moving forward, push through. We think there's not enough time, so we just force ourselves. And I think, that can be extremely disempowering. It's very exhausting, and it does lead to burnout. And I interestingly, as you were talking, I was reflecting back on some of our episodes, and we talk about the power of the pause and just pausing long enough to stop the go, go, go. But I want to make sure our listeners understand that reflection is totally different, right? The power of the pause when we're stuck in go, go, go is very powerful, but reflecting back is actually, yes, yeah, it's not just being in the moment and thinking, it's actually looking back. And I know that
Mm-hmm.
probably makes a lot of sense because, we didn't start this episode like we often do with a definition of reflection. I don't think it's necessarily needed. But I also want to point out that, and kind of getting back to the question that, has my reflection practice changed over the years? And it has, because it's changed tremendously, because I used to look back and beat myself up.
Mm-hmm.
I would speaking of drinking, I also don't drink, right? Our listeners who've been around for a while know this. I do not go to AA. I have a very different approach to, my relationship with alcohol, my former relationship with alcohol. And the whole point is figure out what works for you. We talk about this a lot in the podcast. There's no one size fits all. And I used to reflect back on work, my personal life, my relationships, and I would beat myself up. So I want to make sure our listeners understand that if you are that person, if you are stuck in negative thought patterns, a practice of reflection, in order for it to be healthy, you have to notice those thoughts when you are sitting in reflection and saying, okay, what am I making this mean? What's another meaning that is also true for me that's not so disempowering? And we're not talking about toxic positivity. It's just, how else could I reframe this that it's actually very useful? And for me, with work, with my personal life, I have to be very, very cognizant of what am I making it mean?
Mm-hmm.
It's a power sentence I go to, and it's a powerful question. If I find myself judging myself or judging others, well, what am I making this mean? And for me, that's been a big game changer in my reflection practice. Noticing when I'm slipping into victim mentality, which a lot of people, I think, really don't understand, that their thoughts can be very victim-y. And I think it's one of the greatest things to just notice and have an awareness of that, well, I got a horrible performance review, or I was passed over for that promotion. And, I've been on the succession plan and they just passed me over. I didn't do something right. My boss doesn't understand me. That can be very disempowered reflecting. And there's a different way to do it. And it's just noticing those thoughts of, well, why do I think that I didn't get that promotion? What can I do to change so that I do get that promotion the next time around? And it's just moving the needle a little bit so that we don't continue in that negative spiral. So I just wanted to point that out because my practice has really changed. And I think if I just gave a glimpse into my brain, that those negative reflective practices I used to have, just beating myself up, really did contribute to my burnout and my debilitating anxiety. So I just wanted to be very open about that. If any of our listeners are feeling the same way, you may just be stuck in a disempowered reflection practice. And the very first step to shifting toward an empowering reflection practice is through awareness. Just noticing, oh, I'm choosing these thoughts. Nobody can make us do or say anything in this lifetime. And once we really understand that concept, unless we are truly in shackles or somebody is holding us captive, or in situations of like literally currently being physically assaulted, then we are disempowered 100%. But if such an disempowered situation has happened in your past, it's not happening to you right now. So what thoughts are you choosing right now about the past?
Mm-hmm.
Very powerful. I think about Elizabeth Smart all the time. Yeah. Google Elizabeth Smart if you don't know who she is, because I have to stop talking because I've been talking too much.
That was so good, though. I mean, what a masterclass on empowered thinking and the ability to use kind of that choice thinking when it comes to reflection. So thank you so much for that. That was so good.
Well, I just know with the burnout statistics that are out there, Work Vivo is now saying 98% of people are burned out. We talked about this in our last stress versus burnout workshop. And I just, the women I've been encountering as of late in HR, they're beating themselves up about their performance reviews. And that reflective practice is not healthy. It's not empowering. And they're really stuck in terms of what they're making their performance review mean. There's a very, very different way to go about looking back on those performance reviews that you don't really like. What are you making it mean? Okay, so Jen, why is it important? Totally shifting into question number 3. Why is it important for HR pros not to charge headfirst into new projects, New Year's resolutions, new goals for the upcoming year with without pausing and completing a reflection practice? Like, why is it so important not to just dive right in?
Mm. Oh man. I mean, I completely get it. As somebody who has undiagnosed ADHD, I totally get the wanting to just jump right in. Like I have piles all around my desk and I'm just like, yeah, let's go. And yet you're absolutely right. I'm like, there she is, absolutely right. So the way that I can best describe this is that the most effective way we can move ourselves from the past to where we're going in the future
Yeah.
is through alignment with our
Mm.
most authentic selves.
Mhm. Mhm.
And doing that requires the honesty,
Yeah.
that gut honesty about what that truth is, right? Because I so appreciate the way that you described it in the last question around the self beating up and all of that,
Mm.
because I think we all just naturally go there, and it can be such a tricky thing to say. We have to make sure that we're really looking at it very transparently and openly, because if we really truly want to be aligned with who we most authentically are, we have to have that clarity, and that clarity is everything to make sure that we're setting ourselves up with a solid foundation, whatever that clarity is, right? And I think that for me, over the past few years, I've been able to lean more in to my
Mm.
quote unquote weaknesses
Mm.
because of the ability of being able to just be okay with the what is, right? The not fighting against the reality of where I know that I have growth, where I need growth, where I'm still struggling. And this is where it goes back to where you and I were talking the other week about imposter syndrome, right? This idea of the not feeling as though it's good enough, so I gotta hide
Mm.
behind something. And the reality is, like, if you really truly want to see your life soar, just own it. Just
Mm.
really be honest and own it and allow it to come out and recognize this is what it is. And then from that place, you can start really being intentional around what are the skills that I
Yeah.
need to build. It's not about judgment. It's not about beating myself up. It's about this honest reflection of what are the skills that I need if I really want to be, this huge international speaker and follow your lead, Catherine. What does that look like? And how do I need to be really raw and honest with myself right now about what needs to change? And
Yeah.
so that level of authenticity, that level of ownership around, what is, has been so huge for me. And it's not easy. Like I said, even right now, here we are at the end of the year, and I need to force myself to do some of this work. I've done some, but I need
Yeah.
to force myself to do more. And it's not comfortable. It's not easy. It's not an enjoyable experience because it actually means you're going to have to get out some of the stuff
Mm.
that is, that sometimes we try to hide behind. And so we have to
Yeah.
snuff it out. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that it is essential for all the reasons, that we've been talking about, but really do it for yourself.
Yeah.
If there's no other reason, do it for yourself. Do it for that person that you know that you can be. And part of that is being willing to drop the armor and go all in.
Yeah.
Well, what about you? What does it look like for you to kind of strip away the jumping into 2025, slow yourself down,
Yeah.
force that reflection process?
Well, I have a question for you before we dive into that. So when and I'm not going to remember the exact word that you just used, but it was something like it's hard for you to do this or it's uncomfortable for you to
Yeah.
do this. Would you mind extrapolating on that a little bit for our listeners?
Yeah,
Why
sure.
is
I
it
mean,
so challenging?
yeah, so I would give the example of, let's say, the performance review or something that has been a pretty significant occurrence, this past year,
Yeah.
that you're wanting to be able to shift in the coming year.
Yeah.
And I think really going in there, I mean, you and I both know. I mean, if I were to look back on myself 20 years ago when I got a performance review, and if it wasn't all A's or stars, right, there was immediate maybe defensiveness, maybe
Yeah.
armor comes up. It's not
Yep.
me, it's them, it's her, it's this, it's whatever, right? I mean, I think this process that we're talking about requires a stripping of all of that and a true ownership of what's real within ourselves. And
Mhm.
that's that takes courage. That's
Yeah.
not always an easy thing to do because it actually requires you to be like, yep, you know what? That is something that I know is a work in progress. But it can be a really difficult thing for a lot of people to kind of get past all of the different deflection and reasons why. I've got 5,000 reasons why maybe I got this one ding, but
Yeah.
yet taking all of that away to just the bare bones and really
Yeah.
being able to be honest and reflective within ourselves, I think is not an easy thing. I think everyone who does it and truly does it deserves like a massive gold star.
Yeah. Yeah. And now I'm reflecting back on that was really helpful for me because my brain actually went to I love reflection. I don't find it hard at all. I find it very empowering and I find it liberating and I love it because for me, it's this, oh my God, thank God I just figured that out. Oh my God, thank God I'm seeing that now. Now things are starting to make sense and I can chart a new path forward. But where, like, when and I do believe that I love reflecting because I
Mhm.
start to see the patterns of what's holding me back. And I'm like, there it is again. It's showing up for you again. You know it's there. So what are you going to pivot? Like, what are you going to do that's slightly differently? So I actually really love the process. However, I'm flashing back to probably this time last year when I was hiking up the hill with a very dear friend of mine who's a psychologist. And I had just gotten into a life changing conversation with a relative of mine. And I was just in it. I'm looking back, I'm trying to figure out how I upset this person, beating myself up trying to figure out what I could say to this other person to get back to good or figure out how we were going to move forward. And this person fully stonewalled. I mean, talk about like, I do not want to talk to you, right? And for me, as I was like hiking with my psychologist friend, like just beating myself up, and slamming into a wall. And this went on for a long time.
Mhm.
And I couldn't do anything about the resistance, right? That this other person had toward me. And that was very, very painful. So for me, fast forward to a year later, I'm it was rough. It was a really, really rough time. And I think when I can't figure out how to change people and I want to change other people, that just shift in myself of, well, I just can't change that other person. So knowing that, how am I going to show up now? I don't know.
Mm.
Yeah, it's I had I not gone through everything that I have gone through in the last year, I wouldn't be where I am today. And I've always held that notion of this is happening for me.
Mhm.
There's so many lessons in here, and those lessons have become clear throughout the year. So going back to when you were saying it's not easy, that year was not easy for me. And I'm so effing proud that I kept going and I am where I am today. Like I knew there was a light. I knew there was silver lining. And I've learned and I've grown and yeah. Anyway, I
And
can totally
what
relate to
a
what you're saying, like I had to really think of an emotionally charged situation for me and I think that is the key. It was that
Mhm, mhm.
very personal relationship. and I just couldn't figure it out. Couldn't
Yeah.
change that other person. Sure,
What a
listening.
great example. I mean, because I think, every one of us can have an example where, we've had something pretty significant happen that
Yeah.
we do not have control over. There's
Yep.
only so much that we have that we can control anybody else, right? That's like Mel
Totally.
Robbins' brand new book, The Let 'Em Theory, right? Like the people are
Yes.
going to be people and they're going to do what they're going to do. And so this idea of, being in a process of reflection and then looking back on the things that we, can and can't control, that can really, I agree. That's one that I have to be really
Ah,
aware of the
yeah.
things that sneak in that then kind of create this false sense of, responsibility or duty for me
Yeah.
when
Yeah.
really it doesn't exist. There's no possible way I'm ever going to get somebody to want to talk to me or to want to change their mind about me, right? You have to realize part of that is some letting go of
Yeah.
the uncontrollable.
Yeah. And that so ties into HR, because depending upon how HR is positioned in an organization, if they're fully supported, or if leadership has a tendency to, I don't know, just see HR as not being strategic, or, a wasteful cost to the organization. That's always an interesting part of it too. And I have no idea where I was going with that. But I think it comes down to like wanting to be liked in the workplace. Oftentimes, especially when there's a reduction in force or there are layoffs going on, people like to blame other people. And oftentimes, HR is the team that takes the fall. So, what are we making that mean? And for me, for most of my career, I took it very personally, if I'm being very honest. And it just, it led to, I'm a bad person, and things I just, kept in my brain when I would look back on, after we laid people off after 9/11, after we laid 110 people off in 2007, 2008. When I look back on those times, what was I making it mean? Yeah,
Yeah.
it was not pretty there for a very long time in my brain. Okay, so Jen, getting to the essential ingredients of a reflection practice, like what ingredients need to be included in a reflection practice for you to make sure that negative talk doesn't come up, or that victim mentality doesn't come up? What's your secret sauce when it comes to your reflection practice to make sure you don't go down that road?
Yeah, I think it's like a bulldog intention around neutrality.
Ooh,
if
there's a
that
quote.
makes sense. So yeah, I think that's something that I have laser focused in my mind is whenever I'm going to be doing any reflection in any way, that I'm steadfast. Like I'm really, very intentional around making sure that there is that neutral frame. And when I
Mm,
notice that sneaking in of self-judgment and self-criticism and everything else, then that's where the questioning comes in. That's where the curiosity comes in. So really
yeah,
it's kind of the two things, right? It's a fight to the finish around neutrality. And then it's a curiosity and trying to, as best as I can, do that from a place of
yeah,
neutrality as well. It's like, what is that? Where is that coming from? Why does
yes,
that matter? Why is that so
yes,
important to me? What is that telling me about what really matters, right? Like one of the things
yes,
that I think came up for me not too long ago is, I know, women in HR, and I know so many others, a lot of times, we end up kind of having this false sense of, to the company, this matters and that matters and X matters and Y matters, but way deep down, right, employee well-being matters, right? But in company after company after company that I worked for, to the business owners, right, to the CEOs, that's not that's not where their priority is. So you get my bottom line, you get all of these things met, and then we can talk about well-being. So this juxtaposition or this conflict within my brain constantly every single year around what it was I truly valued versus what it was I was told I valued was a really, really
Yep.
difficult thing for me to work through. And I think
Yep.
over time now I've been able to recognize that and realize that's part of my intention around, working where I do, and being very clear about wanting that alignment
Oh,
between
yeah.
my values and organizational values. But so many others, out there I know really struggle with that. And that's, for me, what really was something that I battled with for a long, long time is like getting to that place where it wasn't something that I was taking it so personally based on,
Mm.
what others or what the business or whatever, what their needs and priorities were versus what I knew deep down my needs and
Oof.
priorities were versus what, I can try to pretend, I can try to
Yes.
carry this torch, but the reality was it was never going to go away within deep within me that employee well-being mattered. And so it kind of found itself in a continual loop conflict over the past 20 plus years in HR.
Yeah.
Did I answer that question right?
I don't think there's a right or wrong. I love the way you answer that, and just that misalignment of values. And so often, yeah, it's this top down. Are the leaders don't necessarily truly understand that if we're not taking care of our employees, if our employees aren't taking care of themselves in terms of their well-being, we can have these
Mhm.
huge lofty goals. However, if your employee is struggling with anxiety to the extent in which I did, how are they going to be able to perform at their best when they're feeling their worst? So if we're not taking care of our employees' well-being, if that isn't one of our top priorities, in my humble opinion, it's a very archaic approach that doesn't work. I mean, the neuroscientists, behavioral scientists, positive psychologists, the data is
On and on.
the data's there. And as you were talking, I just started thinking, I had this thought has not crossed my brain ever in my life, that when you started talking about values, I always think about, okay, I need to reflect before I can think about next year.
Mhm.
And I think it's both a top down, bottom up. I think they're very symbiotic and they go together, because if we don't have our values, if we don't know what our personal vision is, our personal mission coming up in 2025, like what do I want to get after in 2025? And I think organizations get it wrong in terms of, well, here's our mission, vision, values, and our 2025 strategic plan. How are you going to align with that? And I'm like, yeah, I get it. We need that part of it. But before we even throw that at our employees, we need to ask our employees, what's your vision? What's your life vision? What is your purpose? What do you stand for? And if you don't know, that's cool. What are you on a mission to do in 2025? And you just ask it a couple of different ways. What are your values? What do you stand for? Regardless of where you work. So I just started thinking, okay, yes, reflection, but knowing where we are going can help us get out of that negativity and that victim mentality. Because when we look back, it's like, oh, I'm so far off from where I actually want to go. I don't have time for that. So as we look back, it's
Mhm.
like, oh, well, if I want to empower women all over the world, I need to stop taking these consulting gigs that have nothing to do with women's empowerment. And it's just a very easy, like, instead of beating myself up, it's like, oh, well, I know why I took those consulting gigs, and it's great and I loved it. And as I move forward next year, I'm so hell bent on where I want to go and what I want to be doing. It's very easy for me to say, okay, that's just not an option for 2025. So for me, that sort of gets back to the question of, what are your essential ingredients for keeping the negative self-talk and the victim mentality at bay? It's being very clear on where I'm going. So
Mhm.
to me, they work hand in hand.
Mhm.
So yeah, you
I
helped me
love
answer the question and what you said. Shocking. That
that.
happens a lot in this podcast.
And how often we change our answers halfway through the
I
other stuff. And we're
know.
like, oh no, actually.
Right? Because I do think, I mean, it's funny because this podcast, we both talked about this. It is, in a way, a reflection practice for both of us because we have
Hmm.
to do some very deep thinking to prepare for this podcast. And sometimes those flashbacks almost come up for both of us. And it's just this beautiful reflection practice in a very safe space where we get very, very honest and we're not beating ourselves up. It's like, oh, okay, I hadn't thought about that in a long time, or I've never looked at it through that lens. It's pretty cool. Pretty cool. So, yeah,
Hmm.
listeners, just come to the podcast every week and you don't have to think about a reflection practice. It's just going to happen when we just start talking here. All right, Jen. So, what advice do you have for our listeners if they're interested in starting their own reflection practice or even fine tuning their practice? What advice do you have for our listeners?
I think the biggest piece of advice I have is to to start to engage yourself following any sort of period of time where there was some sort of um,
Ooh.
shift or change, or so I think starting to get into that rhythm of, okay, we're going into the beginning of the year, or I'm just about to start this new project, and I want to look at that. And so being able to start to kind of do that reflection is something that I think for most of us is going to feel a little awkward at first. And so the only way you're going to start getting more comfortable with it, getting better at it, is just doing it. It's the actual
Mm,
action that's going to make the difference. And so even if it feels a little clumsy and it feels a little off, I think just starting that process and
yeah.
doing so from a place of, really trying to be as, honest with yourself in that non-judgmental, overreactive way towards yourself way, I think is something that is really a good place to start.
Yeah.
I think it's not anything necessarily that I have, a whole rule book, because I think every person's reflective practice, just like every person's gratitude practice, might look a little bit differently. And so
Yeah.
from my perspective, it's really about starting, right? Just getting off the block and putting that out there and starting to say, okay, how did this go? What worked well? What didn't? Start to kind of come up
Yeah.
with some questions, and we can even kind of put some out there in the show notes to get people started with some reflection questions. That can be a good place to start. And
Yeah.
then just do it. Just do it. Just get
Yeah.
get comfortable with putting yourself through that discomfort, and eventually you're going to be not uncomfortable like Catherine is. Whereas I still struggle a little bit here and there, but I think the more you do it, the more comfortable you'll get.
Well, and I think the only reason I'm not struggling because you really help me see like, okay, when am I struggling? And it's when my emotions are high and the stakes are high. And losing somebody I love very much, that was a high stakes situation, right? So yeah, it's not that it's, my life has been, with the exception of that one relationship, I had a freaking banner 2024. I really did. I think one advice I have for our listeners, because as you were talking, I started thinking about drinking. You and I both
Mm.
stopped drinking. And the advice I have for listeners, whether it's about drinking or not, I think oftentimes when we reflect, it's I've got to stop drinking, or I've got to stop showing up in a way that I've got to stop getting bad performance reviews. We focus on the stopping. And I think that's a
Mm.
great start, but I think it's important to finish the sentence. So this is my advice for our listeners. When I stop drinking, I will start doing what? What does it allow you to bring into your life? And for me,
Mhm.
when I stopped drinking, I really started to feel calm. I started to feel peace. And I wanted that.
Mm-hmm.
I started to have mental clarity. I no longer started the day, not even with a full on hangover, but just that little bit of elevated anxiety or the beating of myself up, right? Because for me, alcohol was just my chosen form of escapism to stop beating myself up for a hot second, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I think my advice for our listeners, when you're in a reflection practice, and if your brain goes to, I've got to stop this, I've got to stop this, I've got to stop this, continue with, okay, I have to stop this because what I want is X. When I stop this, I will get X. And that's just classic coaching of shifting out of what we don't want and moving our focus to what we do want. Because for me, with drinking now, it's no longer about, well, I don't get to socialize. I don't get to go out as much. It's more, I get to spend quality time with my friends doing healthy things because I'm no longer anything less than 100% clear in my mind and my brain and my sleeping, and everything is so much better. I want that life for the rest of my life. I feel good. I'm happy.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, reflecting back on my drinking, it's not the shame. I don't stay stuck. I mean, though some memories do come up, but when they come up, it's like, oh, but now I get to live this life, this up-leveled life, this clear life, this deep connection with myself, this deep connection with other people. I don't know if that made any sense at all, but stopping and starting, I think, is really helpful. And one thing that oftentimes we don't realize, going back to control, the idea of control, when we reflect back on 2024, I often ask my clients, well, what are you keeping? What are you choosing to keep as we go into 2025? Because oftentimes we think, well, I have to do open enrollment. It's part of my job. I have to keep recruiting because the managers over here just keep churning and burning employees and we have constant turnover. So I have to keep recruiting. And I think the thought upgrade is, well, I'm actually choosing to continue to recruit. I don't have to. You don't have to. We could all quit our jobs tomorrow. I'm choosing to stay in this job. I am keeping my job. It can be that simple. It's really interesting, I think.
Yeah,
It's really just a mind shift.
absolutely.
Yeah. All right, Jen, final bits of words of wisdom. Words of wisdom. Anything else you want to impart upon our listeners before we wrap up today?
Yeah. Well, I really loved what you had just said, just about, the process of I can't remember exactly how you said it, but the process of really going inward and recognizing,
Mm-hmm.
that there's only so much that we do have control over, but we always have control over our mindset. Right? We always do, as much as we don't believe that we do. And this is one of those faulty beliefs that I truly believe that the more that I have practiced the things that I've practiced, it's a belief that's actually changed and shifted and evolved over the years. And I think that that's one of those things that I hate to be like that person, like, if I can do it, you can do it too. But
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
it truly, truly has made a huge, huge difference, because that sneakiness around the self criticism and the self blame and the things that sneak in, I just don't allow for it anymore. But
Mm-hmm.
yet, when it comes to the big stuff, when it comes to the things I might be especially triggered about, family, or other areas, that is still, it's still going to be something that stuff is going to sneak in. So I think we need to give ourselves a break when it comes to, in all areas, I'm going to be so neutral and I'm going to be able to do this reflection process. No, it's not going to be a perfect thing. But the
Nope.
more that you can commit to it and really be honest about that reflection, really own what needs to be owned, but again, don't sit in it. Don't throw the pity party. Own it, move on. And then, like you were saying, then develop what that plan is going to look like. So that's going to shift. This is a non negotiable. This will shift in 2025. What do I
Mhm.
need to do about it? And it
Yeah.
might mean that you might need to look elsewhere when it comes to an organization and
Yep.
your values clearly, when you do that reflection process, you're like, oh my gosh, that can be kind of a scary thing. I worked with somebody not too long ago that they basically said that. They're like, hey, I'm looking, what I want to do for 2025, and I'm not feeling so good about where I'm at. And that's okay. That can be something that you can say,
Yep.
okay, this is not going to change today, but
Yep.
maybe that is where your intention goes. That
Yep.
awareness now that this is not working for you. And sometimes it takes a really good, honest reflection process to get to that point where you can really see, oh my gosh, this relationship, this job, this X, Y, or Z, if I'm really being honest, it's not aligning with me,
Yeah.
like through me. And rather, I'm having to fake it. I'm having to, do all of these things. And again, just like you said, there are times you're going to have to do the open enrollment if you're in HR. I mean, there are the non negotiables, but there are so many other things that truly do have the opportunity to find a level of empowerment within ourselves. And it
Hmm.
really just requires that honest assessment and then that awareness that we do have the control to be able to change all of these things that we really have come to believe that
Yeah.
it's just, it's something I'm just going to have to suck it up and deal with.
Yeah.
No, not no, not
Yeah.
necessarily. So I think, it's really about taking that step back and really being truly honest and aware, having support in some ways, like your psychologist friend, the
Oh,
coach I work with,
yes.
the therapist I've worked with. You and I have talked about that enough. It's like almost a broken record, but it really, really does matter to be able to have someone else that you
Yes.
can have that can
Yes.
help you to see what maybe you're not really recognizing
Yeah.
that's really going on. So yeah, I think again, it kind of goes back to the practice, but it really goes to setting that intention. And I think you explained it so well. So I kind of just piggybacked off of it. So what oh go
I
ahead.
lo- yeah, and I'm going to piggyback off you because my final bits of wisdom. It's so funny you bring up open enrollment because it can be the bane of people's existence in HR. It's like, oh my God, I have to do it again. And one of the things that I taught a class called Thrive in 25 to 38 women a couple of weeks ago. I'm going to be teaching it on the 31st as part of HR Empower Hour. And one of the quick shifts when we're reflecting back on open enrollment in 2024, did you go into open enrollment thinking, I don't want to do this, things aren't ready, they're not perfect, people have questions, I don't know the answers? I want to have the answers. Like, why? Ask yourself why open enrollment was so challenging for yourself in 2024. Because the way that
Mm,
I look at open enrollment is, oh my God, I have an opportunity to help people select health insurance coverage for themselves and their families, to decide which voluntary benefits they actually want to have. Am I focused on the fact that insurance rates are going up a bazillion times? Sure, I do have to think about that. I do have to communicate that. At the end of open enrollment, I want the result to be I ensured people had coverage. Did they miss deadlines? Did they get their paperwork in late? Okay, well, what do I need to do next time that's just a little bit different to make sure people have the information they need? I feel like sometimes if we're being really honest with ourselves in HR, we approach open enrollment as a burden. We are burdened by the employees. We are burdened by the health insurance companies increasing the
mm,
cost. We are burdened by the organization, the leaders at the top saying, well, how are you going to make this work financially? And what
mhm,
if instead of feeling so burdened, if we're being really honest, if we're reflecting back, it was such a burden. It's woe is me. It's a victim mentality versus thank God I'm in this position and I get to help figure this out. Thank God I'm here to be able to help the organization figure out what the right mix is, figure out numerically what the percentage increase is going to be, figure out what the best talking points are to communicate the changes to the employees, and make sure people have the right coverage for them. And that is a huge shift. I get to do open enrollment, and that may feel a little bit too far for people, but that is truly how I see open enrollment. It's truly how I look at mediation. It's truly how I look at some of the more difficult things. It's like, thank God I'm the person here.
Yeah.
So I think reflecting is, where did I choose victim mentality? If I'm being really honest with myself, and how do I show up differently in 2025 as my own victor?
Oh, yes.
I don't know. I just went off on a tangent. I don't think I'm allowed to drink coffee the rest of the day, Jen. I think that's it. 9 a.m. on a Sunday, I think I'm cut off.
Oh my God.
Well,
no, I love it. I mean,
yeah. Keep going.
No, I was just going to say, I really, truly love that pulling out and really recognizing our own part because, think about open enrollment, right? And yeah, there can be a large spectrum between, I love open enrollment and, I hate it and, I'm burdened
Yes.
by it. And yeah, I think that so often one of the greatest things that you can get from your reflection process is recognizing that spectrum, right? Is recognizing the gap between where you might have been stuck in your thought process and your beliefs, which is not something that can just be changed like that. It's like, oh yeah, I want to believe that this is the funnest thing ever. Click. It just doesn't work that way, right?
Yes.
Like,
No.
it takes time to really bring that in. And so the power of being able to see the truth of what it is and then start to kind of chip your way towards what you really want to be able to believe in recognizing that much of, when we say like victim mindset, that can feel almost triggering for some. It's like, oh, like as though I'm doing it on purpose. We're not. It's not something that we're doing on purpose. It's subconscious programming that we've been with our entire lives. So recognizing that and pulling apart from that, I think can be just such an empowering practice rather than looking at it as being something that is, limiting or that we're bad in some way because we had, this victim mindset, about open enrollment. It's really about no. Completely fine, completely okay. You're human. Now what do you want to do? Right now, where do you want to go with that? And so I really love the way that you define that because with something like open enrollment, there's 5,000 other examples we can give in HR of different things that could be triggering for people. What is that spectrum look like for you? And how do you start moving that needle in the way that you really would want to be? So yeah, good topic today.
Oh, I love it. I love it. And I love that we circle back on open enrollment. That's just so fun. I mean, it just is perfect time of year because it's something in the very recent past that I think a lot of our listeners can relate to. So yeah. I love it. Andrew Huberman, I don't know if we were listening to the same podcast, but talking about the importance of just these slight changes. You cannot go from I hate open enrollment to I love open enrollment. Not what we're saying here, but how do you want to experience open enrollment? Decide that for yourself in 2025. What do you want to feel? What do you want to experience? And then what is a useful thought that's going to help you experience that in 2025? So much in there, Jen. I freaking love it. Andrew Huberman. Yeah. We'll have to put that in the show notes. Jen, thank you for your time this morning on a lovely Sunday. What are you going to do with the rest of the day?
I am going skiing today. So I got everything packed up and heading out.
Get out of there.
Yeah. How about you?
Today is my day off from skiing. I have been skiing so much. I'm exhausted. I have my fire going. I'm looking out at the mountains right now, and I am going to redo my website and get ready for 2025. It is go day for me. And then I'll take a lot of time off next week because I'll be with family. So yeah, I'm excited.
Awesome. Awesome. Awesome.
Well, enjoy the slopes for me. I love that. And for all of our listeners out there, Jen's going to enjoy the slopes for you too. And please remember that without you sharing this podcast, reviewing the podcast, just loving all over the podcast, we are not going to be able to impact the HR profession as much as we want to. We can't do this without your help. So thank you so much for listening. We so appreciate every time you download an episode, every time you rate, you review the podcast. We appreciate it because otherwise, we just don't know if we're doing a good job, and we want to hear that feedback from you. So whether it's positive, whether you're like, oh, y'all have to stop doing this, please reach out to us. Please let us know what you honestly think of this podcast so we can continue to make it your absolute go-to podcast in 2025. So remember, every single day is a great day to thrive and shine in HR, and we'll see you again next week.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.